Thin Digital Line. Policing in the year 2045.
Hello, I'm Jason Harwin and welcome to the latest episode of Thin Digital Line. In today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined firstly by Jodie Stanley, who's a senior service designer from the award-winning digital transformation company Exception. Welcome, Jodie.
Hello.
Later on, I'll be joined by Jason Hogg, who's the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police and who's the National Police Chief's Lead for the workforce. So, Jodie, we're going to talk today about people. So, over the series, we've talked a lot about technology, data and digital, but we're going to talk about the workforce for the future, and importantly, the changes that policing will need to do for 2045. So, firstly, looking from outside policing and the workforce change that's taking place outside, what sort of things are organisations doing around how the workforce looks differently in preparation for data, digital and technology?
Yep, so in the charity and government sectors that I've worked in, there's not as much of a fast-paced move as you'd expect. They're still kind of working towards getting off paper, automating processes, removing those repetitive tasks that you kind of see in everyday offices. So a lot of the work is towards that, and there are more and more teams involved in human-centred design to make those movements towards kind of more efficient processes. Another thing that these sectors are moving towards is more self-serve, so enabling users to be able to access data themselves rather than having to navigate through many, many services and speak to lots of different people to access their data and access services. And also streamlining services. So something that the government's doing is working towards a single login. So that's for all of their services, which might not sound that impressive, but they have thousands of services in the government, and moving towards just being able to access those through one login is a pretty big step. So things like being able to apply for a passport to accessing training for child development can all be accessed through one single login. And the way that they're able to do that is by doing the user research and understanding how people are currently navigating those services to make it simpler for the user, but also simpler for the people delivering those services.
Yeah, and I know certainly from policing, that single online reporting from the members of the public to make sure it's consistent in terms of whichever force you get in touch with has already happened and continues to be expanded. So, like say, taking the learning from outside policing, that's already started. I think one of the challenges for policing at the moment, though, is the workforce and requirements of the workforce to understand digital data and technology is really, really important. And again, accepting there'll be some there that are really, really on board with the issues, but clearly there's a lot that don't understand it and need some more investment and in training realistically. What sort of things should policing be considering when we're obviously making significant changes around technology in terms of the people issue?
Yeah, so something that I've seen where it doesn't really work very well is where an organisation sees a shiny bit of tech that gets sold to them and then they buy it and then they kind of just inflict it on the workforce, and the workforce like, what is this? They see it as a burden. They see it as something that they don't really know how to do. They're not confident in how to use it, and they tend to avoid it and stick with the older ways of working. The ways in which this can be improved and people can pick up the new ways of working is if the research is done. So before even deciding what tech to invest in, really understanding what the problem is that you're trying to solve and not skipping out that really, really important point. And user research is the best way to do that, understanding how people are experiencing the current services, and that can be the workforce as well, how they're experiencing their current processes and the tools that they're using. What are the bottlenecks and what are the issues that need ironing out, and then working out what tech can solve those issues. And by involving people in that research, they feel listened to. And then you can also involve them in the design process of working out what the solution's going to be, getting them involved in testing and making those decisions so that it's not just coming from the top.
So again, in the first episode, Gavin Stevens, the NPCC chair, talked about the importance of technology being connected to the people and the people connected to technology, isn't it? So I think that's what you're saying there, Jodie, is it's from the bottom up, isn't it? It's, yes, you need to understand how it fits the wider infrastructure of new technology, but the reality is this is about making the job easier for the staff, but at the same time making sure we're delivering the service to the public, isn't it? If I was a senior leader in policing now, and obviously only left very recently, what advice would you be giving me in how we could do some of that work, making sure that people are more involved?
Get out there and see what people are doing, see what context people are working in, what are the issues that they're dealing with in their everyday roles. Is it realistic for them to adopt new tech? Do they have time? Is it going to add to their workloads, or is it going to make it easier for them? And if it's not going to make it easier for them, maybe that tech isn't the right answer and alternatives need to be looked at. Really, really understanding the context so that people feel listened to and they feel supported by tech. Tech should be something that helps people, not that adds to people's workload.
And in terms of outside policing and what you've seen and are seeing, how is other organisations, other sectors preparing the future workforce? What sort of things are they doing?
Exactly that. So focusing on human-centred design, I'm seeing more teams being brought in, so more multidisciplinary teams of researchers, designers and the tech specialists coming in to look at that problem from a holistic view. So looking at from the ground, what are people experiencing, what are the problems, and doing exactly what I said, so doing that user research and taking people along the journey. And then once their solutions have been designed, getting some champions involved to try and kind of roll that out across the organisation so that it's not just the leaders saying, here's a thing, go and work it out. They're kind of building those partnerships between central teams, leadership and the people on the ground.
I'm recognising your policing experience is quite limited, apart from the conversation we've had and what you see and hear from friends and colleagues from it. In terms of that takes time, and sometimes police services don't feel they've got time to do that. Persuade me, if I was a leader now, why do I need to invest that time? If I don't invest that time, what's going to be the consequences?
Because if you don't, you're going to invest in something that probably won't work and is going to frustrate your workforce, and then you've just got a big lump of tech sitting there that no one knows what to do with it. Designing something properly around the problem really, really minimises the risk of having to invest in fixing things in the future, and you're more likely to get it right if you listen to the people, understand the context, understand the user needs, and if that's the workforce or if it's victims and offenders, what are they actually experiencing and how are they going to interact with this new tech?
Yeah. And you touched on earlier about some learning from government and obviously that single login realistically. Clearly on the episode we've covered, and again Gavin touched on about the importance of taking the public with us in terms of the change that's taking place. What's some of the good practice you've seen of how the public get more involved to actually, firstly, shape what that new way of working is going to look like, but secondly, make sure they actually are then doing it and making the difference?
Again, user research, I'm going to sound like a parrot here, but user research is the best way, getting people involved, getting the public involved, and making sure you're researching with a diverse group as well. Don't just get kind of a token group of users in and say, right, we've done it, but really, really doing meaningful research with a diverse group to make sure that your services are accessible going forward, and just to break down those boundaries between kind of the police and the public and that power imbalance as well. And doing research is the best way to do that. And also getting them involved in design as well. So co-design is a great technique to break down those boundaries, and you get more opinions that way, you get a holistic view, and you can be really, really innovative when you get more people involved.
So obviously this podcast is about looking towards 2045. From what you're telling me so far is obviously policing needs to invest in this now. Clearly there's a conversation to have about have policing got the skills, expertise to be able to understand the user requirements around it. But the reality is, if without doing that, as you touched on quite rightly, potentially investing things that's not the right solution and therefore wasting public money. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah,
definitely. And I think it's not just the police, it's everything. It's kind of all sectors, and more sectors are working towards this way of working. And I would hope in the future that that's kind of the norm, a human-centred design approach to tech and technology and AI and everything around that.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because again, whilst we've focused very much on policing during this series, clearly keeping communities safe is not just about policing, is it? It's around the wider criminal justice system. It's around a societal change. It's around the importance of communities being built together. So I suppose one of the challenges for policing is when you're looking across this, you can't look at it in isolation. So again, is there opportunity through collaboration to make sure you're working with the other public sectors and private sector to get that user insight? Again, have you seen good practice outside policing probably in terms of that user where organisations have clubbed together to get the information they require?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really important step in the design process as well, understanding the users, but also looking at that wider stakeholder group. And that may be other organisations, and just taking a holistic view of that service and everyone who touches that service. And particularly for the police, that will mean looking at social services, looking at the healthcare, and looking at everything that surrounds that individual who needs that support.
So really useful insights, clearly some good practice, some learning for policing and what they need to be considering. I suppose the point now is in terms of the workforce for the future, and that's not about policing, how do you see that changing? And if we looked ahead to 2045 and we may be doing different things at that stage, what do you think the workforce would look differently? How would it look differently?
I think more and more we're celebrating diversity. The younger generations, it's becoming the norm to talk about diversity and be more open about diversity. I would like to see a more diverse workforce, more diverse leadership. That will support moving forward to create more diverse services and systems that support a wider range of people. I also think Gen Z are digital natives. They have grown up with the internet. I'm not that young anymore. I didn't grow up with the internet. I had to learn how to use it. And I would say that they're more used to fast-paced changes in technology. So change will be the norm, and adopting new ways of working will hopefully be the norm, and it will happen more smoothly.
Yeah. So I think the important bit there is the diversity, opportunity for police to be more representative. There is a real great opportunity because technology will enable some of that, won't it, going forward? Again, the debate about, do they actually have to be in a police station? Do they actually have to be in the current country where the service is being delivered debate, realistically? So, yeah, it'd be really interesting how that develops, isn't it? Again, not being part of policing, though, clearly 2045, hopefully all around. What do you want policing to deliver in 2045 as a member of the public?
I think that for me, the important element of the police is the human element. They're dealing with people who are having really, really bad days. They're dealing with mental health, they're dealing with domestic abuse, and the skills of being creative and empathy are really important. And I hope that new tech will take away the burden of people having to create reports, input data, and free up their time to do the more human elements of their job.
Yeah, again, the human bit you can't take away, can you? You shouldn't be taken away. So, okay, well, let's see. Jodie, a massive thank you. Really insightful, some real important learning that's taking place outside policing that is very, very relevant for policing. Again, certainly what you've told me today is about that user engagement. Again, the importance of working with people, not just to understand of what the requirement is for those individuals, but making sure they're shaping the future design of technology, the use of data, and also at the same time looking at the wider bits about improving service to the public. So really, really important message. Jodie, a massive thank you for your time and a massive thank you for your insights.
Thanks, Jason. Really, really happy to be involved.
I'm now delighted to be joined by Jason Hogg, who's the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police and the National Police Chiefs Council Lead for Workforce. Welcome, Jason.
Good morning, Jason.
So earlier on, I was speaking to Jodie Stanley regarding the changes outside policing and the workforce for the future as well. So I suppose the first question for us to discuss this morning is about what's changed in policing over the last 10 years regarding the workforce with the impact of digital data and technology. What's your views on that?
So the first major change in the last 10 years is the workforce has changed significantly in numbers. So we now have 40% of the workforce under 5 years worth of service with significant retirements. So we have a much younger workforce than we have previously, which is obviously an opportunity and a threat in terms of relative inexperience, but there is an opportunity for younger people who one would suggest more up to date with using technology and more technologically available going forward. So I think some real changes around that. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the size and scope of the workforce since 2010, it hasn't really changed significantly. We've lost about 10,000 people, 233,000 now versus 244,000, but the rank structure is the same. The numbers of people in different functions, whether it be response, neighbourhoods, investigations, and supervisory ratios are exactly the same. So on one level, we've seen very little change in the actual structures of the workforce.
So one of the things obviously we talked through with other guests, Jason, through the episodes is around the need for police reforms from this for the future. Again, obviously the conversation with Alex around the impact of artificial intelligence, again, the impact of serious and organised crime with Chris, and obviously recently with Gavin as well around the issues for police reform. In terms of going forward, how do you see the workforce changing, particularly towards 2045?
So I think there's a great deal of research in this area, and we need a new workforce which is better at investigating crimes. Investigation skills are important. Secondly, some work done by the Police Foundation, the importance of relational skills, the ability to communicate effectively. And that policing has always been a people-led endeavour, and it will always be the case. And then that third strand, which is being able to use data and digital media much more effectively. And we need a workforce that can do all of those things. But the challenge, of course, is we may have some people who can be highly effective in the digital space, but they're not necessarily the people with those skills you're looking for if you're policing the streets of London where I am today on a Saturday evening. So I think we've got this challenge around the workforce needs different types of skills. And I do think there's something about greater specialisation that we need in the service and the ability to allow people to leave the service and come back with those enhanced skills, particularly around digital AI and being able to attract from the private sector. And at the moment, our workforce structures do not allow that.
I know obviously you've led over the years with your national responsibilities around fast track and direct entry for detectives. Do you see that's evolving with some of the specialist roles you just touched on there?
I do. I think the case study around direct entry detectives has been highly effective. 30 forces are now using that. We've now got more people in detective training than we have in the history of policing, and forces are really investing in this area. There are many forces now, including mine, which has no detective vacancies, and we've been able to market a really attractive career. But the reason why that's effective, I think, is it's attracted a completely different type of person. And certainly in my force, we are made up of people who used to be teachers, social workers, lawyers, academics, actors. I've met dentists, various professions, but people who've always been interested in policing, but really didn't think driving a response car, working a night shift is for them. But they are interested in investigating cybercrime or serious and organised crime, counter-terrorism. So we're able to attract a different type of person into policing. And I do think the detective entry routes that the service has embraced warmly could in many ways be a roadmap to what the future might look like, and having different entry opportunities for different people with different levels of service. The only thing we need to fix now is the issue of pay and pay reform, which is the 20th century model for a 21st century challenge.
Yeah, we'll come to that shortly. I know the conversation with Jodie was around the real opportunity for policing and wider public sector about representation of local communities, and again, giving people opportunity to join the service that traditionally would not have been able to join because, like you say, the roles would have been prohibitive because of what were required of the roles. So let's go to the challenges a bit then. You touched on there briefly about pay and conditions. Just talk about some of the challenges around that going forward and what's happening in policing around that at the moment.
Well, police pay has, and I mean police staff as well, in real terms, according to the Consumer Price Index, it's dropped by 16% between 2010 and 2023. Also, significant changes to the pension arrangements. So in terms of the offer, the remuneration for policing is far less generous than it has been in previous generations. And of course, we still have, where you served, Jason, I imagine a police officer's salary, you could buy a house in Lincolnshire. You certainly can't where I work in Berkshire or Buckinghamshire. We've got some real differentiations across the country. The problem we have is we have an antiquated pay system which makes no logical sense. It's been developed over a period of time, which pay tends to be related to time served. But of course, the time served was this gold-plated public sector pension at the end, which is no longer there. And what I see all the time is, certainly for my force, people leaving for the private sector because the skills one develops as a police officer in terms of problem solving, good communicator, working under pressure, managing threat risk harm, they are highly marketable skills. So if we are really going to attract and retain talent, we need to be much more effective at being able to bring people in at different levels of banding, which other areas of the public sector can do, and get away from pay is down to how long you've worked in policing.
Yeah, no, that's really important, isn't it? So again, I know from some of the conversations with Tony in the first episode and the issue around attraction and retention, particularly again around specialists around technology and the issues around change as well. So I think that's certainly welcome in terms of the conversation taking place. And I think, like you say, it's going to be a key issue going forward to attract those individuals that will add the added value to policing as well. One of the things we touched on with Jodie as well was around change. And obviously policing is used to change. That's one consistent issue, isn't it? But one of the things is policing is not so good at is maximising the benefits from some of the changes, because reality is things move on and we have to move on to something else next. So in terms of how we maximise better the benefits of digital and technology, and obviously like you touched on data, because we're so data rich, is there anything taking place in policing now to how we improve realising the benefits of change? And importantly, is there anything going to happen in the future to realise the benefits of change as well?
I think one of the problems we have is the fact that we have 43 forces of different sizes and different financial pressures and different systems. We are certainly not being effective in maximising investment in the digital space. I do think the future, just from a purely financial perspective, will lead to less police forces. And some forces won't be financially viable in the next 10 years, never mind in the next 20 years. And I do think that's an opportunity to almost top-slice budget and invest in technology from the centre, so police forces are on the same platforms. There is lots of examples across policing of real innovation around robotic process automation, around data platforms sharing data with partners. But it is not universal. And I think there is an opportunity for future governments to really grasp the nettle about this and investing at the front end, top slicing budgets, and make sure we're working on the same technology. And The reason why policing, I'm still always an optimist, despite the demands on policing. We do know there's a relatively small number of people who commit the most crime and the most demand for all our services. And if we focus on them, we will make things better and make our communities safer. And the same with vulnerability. We just need that ability to map all the demand coming through and put our resources in the right place. I do think we're getting much, much more sophisticated in our approach, but there's still a lot more to do.
You touch on there about how demand's changing, and again, we obviously discussed with Peter around cyber-enabled crime and the volume of that now compared to other crimes, and the challenges around, again, the workforce changing to address those issues. And again, we'll touch a lot on that later on. So, I suppose one of the things that going forward, again, artificial intelligence, it seems to be the word that everybody's using at the minute around technology. There's lots of issues in terms of risk around serious and organised crime and deepfake and everything else around it. And obviously, again, you touched on about machine learning and robotics. How much do you think robotics will be in policing going towards 2045?
I think it already is in certain forces. The forces like mine in Thames Valley, I've been able to attract people from the private sector who've taken significant pay cuts, but they've fallen in love with policing. And that's a really important point in terms of the offer that we have. I've got a 2-year backlog about the number of processes I want to automate through robotic process automation. Discussion yesterday, how can I invest more money into this area? But I think it can take a lot of our admin function away. Certainly there's some forces who are doing some pilots with ChatGPT, Microsoft 365, automating meetings, minutes of meetings, agendas, actions. All that technology is available now. And certainly in the control room space, there are a number of forces who are using, it's not really AI, but it's to understand threat, risk and harm in terms of voice recognition in those calls. And certainly we'll be live in my force early next year. So if there is a domestic incident, that will jump to the front of the queue if it's a 101 call. The technology is out there but developing. But like I've said, it's being done in a way which is not consistent. And there are different levels of digital maturity across the 43 forces.
That's key, isn't it? It's about consistency and not depending which area you live in is what service you're going to get. How much do you think culture affects some of those changes as well, Jason?
I mean, hugely, hugely, hugely. We have 43 police forces, and I read the newspapers with interest, as if policing in our country is this single culture that pervades everything. It is just not the case, having worked in a number of police forces. They are completely different, and organisations feel completely different. And it depends where you work. I mean, I'm fortunate to work in a very diverse part of the country where a lot of people who work for us certainly weren't born in the Thames Valley, and many of them weren't even born in the UK, because it's a part of the world where there are opportunities. There's a population profile where people move between roles very, very regularly in and out of London. And so I think my organisation is reasonably digitally literate, and like I've said, being able to attract people from the private sector. That is not universal, and I don't think policing has been clear about what we're looking for and what the opportunities are working policing and the difference of roles, and certainly in that digital and AI space. I'm genuinely think we could attract people from different sectors because the opportunity, the challenge and the sense of satisfaction working in policing gives.
Yeah, it's that attraction piece, isn't it? Again, it's really, really important, isn't it? It's what's the opportunity for joining policing. With Jodie, we talked about what she would expect as a member of the public. And again, interestingly, a lot of that, what we think they may need in the future, some of it's go back to where we were delivering that service around empathy, the importance of an officer in person being able to understand, listen and respond to the needs of that individual as well. So whilst technology and data can help us do that, it's not to replace the human being part of it as well. So just in terms of any other challenges going forward, you've touched on there already about the pay and conditions and there's some of these challenges around culture and obviously the issues around the fragmentation, some would argue, around policing because the scale of it and actually the number of different forces within it. Is there any other challenges you see in terms of the workforce for the future as well?
There's two additional ones I can think of. One, the issue of diversity, and we live in interesting times where there is a culture war in place and polarized views around diversity. But fundamentally, as our country becomes more diverse, policing needs to be able to recruit from all sections of society in order to attract and retain talent. We have made outstanding progress when it comes to female representation. Last year, 43% of all student officers were female. We've got a biggest representation of females in the history of policing. And if you compare us with other traditional male-dominated professions like the fire service, military, we are just streets ahead, and we showed how successful we have been. we need to do exactly the same thing when it comes to our minority ethnic communities, because effectively it allows us to tap into talent from all parts of our communities, which is really, really important. And the second issue, on one level, like I've said, we do need to invest in digital expertise, but we do need to provide a 24/7 response with officers and staff working, late shifts, night shifts, Christmas Day, and being physically visible on the streets. And we are seeing an increase in the number of officers who are sick and who are not deployable. And that will cause some challenges for us. Unfortunately, with the stress on police budgets going further down the line, we simply haven't got roles for some of those individuals like we would in the past. So I think there is some real challenges about how we manage performance issues, but also manage the whole issue of deployability across policing as well.
Yeah, and I think what's important for listeners is obviously to hear that policing recognising some of the challenges ahead and the work that's already done now, not just for today, but for the future as well. So I'm very conscious we're going up towards our time limit for today. So I've done it with other guests as well, Jason. So fact or fiction, looking at 2045. And I think you may have just finished in the police service by then, I think.
I hope so. I'll be 70 by then, Jason. Yeah.
Well, you never know, do you? So it's important about leadership continuity. So
I'll still be working. I'm sure I'll still be working at 70 years of age if I'm still alive.
So just the things about fact or fiction for the future then. So drones. Do you think drones will be the main fleet for the air support unit at that time?
I do know a little bit about this. We are trialling beyond line of sight drones at the moment. Let's wait and see. Flying an unmanned drone in the deserts of Afghanistan is probably very different to flying it over London in terms of the risk to the public. If that is successful, there is an opportunity to transform how we do air support. Absolutely. Certainly as things stand at the moment, everything I've seen suggests we will increase our use of drones, but we will still need an air support, piloted air support capacity, certainly in the medium term.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Resources. So obviously with the ever-expanding criminality around cyber-enabled crime, do you think there'll be more resources dealing with that kind of crime than there will be any other crime in total?
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure around this. Even though 50% of all our recorded crime at the moment is fraud and cybercrime, we have a tiny percentage of our workforce. But of course, we know most of that offending takes place in other parts of the world. And the criminal justice system is not designed in order to bring prosecutions. Great work has been done in some of our other law enforcement partners at the moment. The future is preventing a crime in the first place and being able to proactively attack and target, and I mean technically, not target those individuals in other parts of the world who are effectively committing offences in the UK. It's not about criminal justice outcomes, and you simply wouldn't need the same amount of resources to do that. The investment in technology is an opportunity to disrupt and protect our communities from cybercrime, rather than having, if you like, boots on the ground investigating cybercrime offences.
Yeah, and again, over the other episodes, we talked about that social responsibility on developers to do that as well in terms of crime impact.
Yeah, you could design most of it out. And I'm of an age, remember how, car radios in the 1990s when I joined policing, which was the main thing I did as a young officer, CDs and car radios from cars, was all designed out, not by us. We can do a similar thing around cybercrime and fraud. I have absolutely no doubt. But of course, criminals will get more sophisticated, and the opportunity to, target victims of crime in the UK from any part of the world does pose a real challenge for us.
And the last one then, so we've been contentious for the other guests so far, is RoboCop or RoboDog?
I think neither. I think policing will always need to be a people-led endeavour, and I think there's something in our culture and expectations that people certainly trust humans more than machines. I think there'll always be a place for real police dogs and real police officers and staff on the streets of the UK.
Jason, a massive thank you for your insights this morning. As you said, it's an important challenge. The workforce is there to deliver for the needs of local communities as well. So a massive thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So key takeaways, as we've discussed through this episode, is about the human being, the human interaction, and about how that helps individuals, particularly those that are most vulnerable and victims of crime as well. We've touched through the issues regarding human-centred design. So if we are designing things for the future, people being involved in that design, whether it be the staff or just important the public. And the last one, recognising change is not new to policing. Change is a constant, and importantly, as we go forward, there'll be further change and need for change as well. So a big thank you to Exception for sponsoring this series. As always, please subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcast. And again, we seek your feedback. In our final episode in this series, we will be looking at all the key takeaways from the earlier episodes and discussing the roadmap into 2045 policing. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thin Digital Line. Policing in the year 2045.